All right. Welcome everyone to a Wednesday reflection. Can I put that there? Are you gonna work with me? Well, kind of. All right. Anyway, welcome to Wednesday. I if you notice, I'm working from home this morning. Getting lots of things ready for we have an investor meeting tonight, hosted here, and the family is out and about in Jackson, and so I'm holding down the fort here, but also taking care of work. I will be at the Angels Attic board meeting at noon, and yeah. Anyway, so let's just jump right into it, shall we? Today, you may notice by the title, is your interests. Should I should I care? and and here's where all that came about. Um, I was in a text chat with some friends, and they were talking about following the events of the European soccer tournament that's going on, the Europa Cup. And it's a very exciting time for people who follow soccer, especially like Premier League, club soccer. So instead of like national teams, it's just your Premier League soccer team like Arsenal and all those like Premier League English teams, but also the similar teams, the club teams in various European nations. How you qualify for the tournament depends on what area you're in and what tournament you would go into. So, like the FA Cup finalists move into Europa Cup. The top four Premier League teams in England go to Europa Cup. Anyway, these are all things I didn't know about. I had to research it for this video. Um, and so that was an interesting kind of research project. Just because I knew if I was going to speak about, top level soccer, I would need to do some reading, some digging, because I don't follow soccer. I never played it as a kid, and so anyway, but I find it very interesting. Every time the World Cup rolls around, I always end up kind of following it, and yeah, I'm getting on the bandwagon. I'm not, an honest fan, but I like the pageantry of it. I like learning about the stories of various teams and the paths they took to get to the tournament. Once you start getting into the tournament, you see like, a small team from Croatia makes an amazing run of it and starts getting, very high up in the tiers and the brackets and whatnot. And so, you have these like Cinderella stories and whatnot. And that's the kind of overarching story that I like. The actual moves of the players and the history of the individual players, their careers. I don't follow. That's too granular for me. Anyway, so my friends were talking about the beautiful game soccer and how it is a liturgical dance, or not a liturgical dance, but a liturgical movement that speaks to that can be a great allegory for church. Um, how you have such artistry in movement, making great things, and you have great plays, and you have amazing periods that swell, and people come from behind, and there are all these great stories that go along with sport. Um, as I was reading this text thread, I was like, aside from a casual enjoyment, like during World Cup, I don't really follow any of that. None of what you're saying actually means much to me. I had to go and research all this to know what these fellows were talking about. Um, and then another member of the group said, "No, soccer's not. The analogy of liturgy. It's baseball. Baseball is the perfect analogy of liturgy and church and whatnot." And So then the soccer or football fans started getting into it with the baseball fans, and they were debating the merits of both sports as analogies for life and worship and theology. And they were kind of doing it all, in fun, tongue in cheek kind of ways. Um, and I appreciated that. I thought it was fun. Um, and it made me think about, um, do I need to care about my friends' uh, interests, hobbies? At what point do I just be like, all right, that's not for me. I'm going to ignore this passionate discussion. But then I think about, how do people respond to me and my fandom, which usually centers around like science fiction and fantasy uh, content, books and movies and TV shows, comic books, Marvel and DC movies, all that kind of stuff. If I start spouting off brilliantly about Star Trek in a sermon, at what point does the person sitting in the pew or watching at home just tune out and say, okay, whatever, Andrew, you're a nerd? Like, I don't understand the analogy you just made. I'm sure it really makes sense to you and it is very valid, but I don't have the background to follow what you're saying. I'm just going to take it on face value, take it for granted. You get a pass. And so I was chewing over these conflicting ideas of at what point do we need to take up and bring into our own consumption other people's interests. And it made me think about, what was the commandment that you shouldn't covet your neighbor's possessions. I shouldn't envy my neighbor's possessions or their things, but what's the inverse of that? And that, I think, bears mentioning on this conversation, but also just in general. Like, I shouldn't covet my neighbor's things, but do I have to like my neighbor's interests? Do I have to, at what point do I need to respond to the things I don't really care about, but my neighbor really cares about? Hold on, my puppy is wanting inside, and she's not going to stop. Come in, girl. Come on. Good girl. You want to see the people? You want to see the people? Come here. Get up. Come here. Oh, you're being shy. Okay. I love you too. All right. So I guess to put it a finer way, if I'm not supposed to covet my neighbor's things because I want them, what about the things that I'm not really interested in, but they are kind of pushing on me? Do I need to receive that and to start putting interest into other people's things? Well, yeah. I mean, that's how we build relationship. I mean, if you think about, if you have a romantic partner, a spouse or partner, their interests in some fashion do become your interests, whether you have them or not. You're going to be exposed to them, and you have to nurture a relationship by supporting them in their geekdom, in their nerddom, in their passion. For example, my wife loves gardening and plants and working outside, and can tell you all the edible plants that are planted in a garden. She's getting much better at identifying all the ornamental plants that are around. I have little to no interest in that, and my thumb is certainly brown, not green. And yet, she does put up with me and my science fiction and comic book stuff. So, it's not like she sits down and watches Star Trek with me, but she supports me in my doing of it. And every once in a while, she will sit down and watch an episode if she's walking through the room and kind of gets caught up on something. she'll stop and watch a few minutes of it, and I respect her for that. Thank you, Emily, for respecting my nerddom. Um, and likewise, I will help her occasionally with the yard work and the pruning of dead plants because I need to help her out because it's going to help her toward her goal of keeping the yard and the garden taken care of. Um, in the book of Acts, Paul deliberately builds a bridge of commonality and understanding with the Athenians by referencing Athenian poets. He says, "For in him in God, for in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring." So the important thing to remember is that here is Paul playing to the Athenian sensibility and using what they know, taking interest and getting to know what speaks to that community so that they can build a bridge of understanding together. And this is not anything new. I mean, this is how we connect with people. We break bread and we share meal together, whether it's a holy meal at the altar table or literally just going out to eat with a group of friends or prospective friends. I mean, how often do we go out on a first date, for example, to a dinner and not, to racquetball? I mean, hey, you might have a first date at racquetball, but you might instead just share a meal and get to know each other and your interests. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 3 and 4, "Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others." I'll paraphrase that again. In humility, count others' significance more than your own significance. So, value other people before you value yourself. And let you look not only to your own interests, but to the interests of others. In that bridging of the gap, in coming to, for in my previous example, understanding soccer and baseball and how that would relate to, say, liturgy, as these people were mentioning, how that relates. I remember months ago, I gave a sermon about one of my favorite moments in a Marvel movie, a comic book movie. And it was a moment that made me want to cry when I saw it. In fact, when I think about it, it makes me really emotional. Because it was this beautiful moment that was well earned and finally happened over 20 movies. Here is this final moment of is Captain America with all of these comic book characters who have been very well fleshed out and loved, and he finally says the iconic phrase from those comics, "Avengers assemble," and it was just this earned moment, and it just I'm excited thinking about it right now. Now, if you don't know comics, or you don't follow the movies, or you haven't been on that whole journey, then you don't have that payoff. But that's fine. The fact that you can recognize that interest in others and empathize with it, relate to it, maybe connect to something that makes you excited. You share that joy, and you know that our human experience is common, is good, happens every day, and I would dare say is a pretty good evidence of God's work in the world. The fact that we, even though we are speaking different languages of comic books and sci-fi and sports and art and cooking and gardening, even though we're speaking different languages about different areas of interest, we are all saying the same thing. Now, on the flip side, we have 2 Corinthians that says, Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? All right, so I looked up that quote because it was the antithesis of what I'm talking about. And yes, to be clear, I am totally proof texting. I am clipping one sentence from a long letter that had a whole through line, and I'm picking it to like highlight the difference of what I'm saying, the antithesis of what I'm saying. So yes, I'm doing the exact thing I would tell you not to do. But it makes me say, well, what about the unbelievers? What about someone who doesn't, in my example? Now, he was talking about, like, you know, people who were not Christian. Don't let non believers weigh you down. If you need to cut ties and live into your faith, do so. So, yes, he is right on that point. But it makes me want to quirk up and ask a question of myself, be my own devil's advocate. At what point do you let go of the burden of unbelievers? So if someone thinks that like comic books are a waste of time and it's just escapism and fantasy, yeah, you're right. But that doesn't mean there isn't truth and joy and introspection and good storytelling that is to be found there and helps you examine yourself. And so I'm not going to waste years and years and years trying to convince Emily that Star Trek or comic books are the best thing ever. But she already recognizes that there is truth there, and I find joy and fulfillment in those areas of interest. Much in the same way, I don't follow Liverpool or Tottenham or any of those English Premier Leagues, but I love my friends who really get wrapped up in it and will, stay up late to watch the live broadcast of a particular game that they are interested in. Listening to my friends wax poetically about the beautiful game is really good, and that is actually what I enjoy. Is not actually watching the game, but watching people talk about the game, because I think that is like much in the same way that comic book writing is really good writing that examines human condition and our needs and our wants and says beautiful things about heroism and vulnerability and evil. You're watching someone craft an elegant narrative based on plot points. Someone speaking beautifully about, say, soccer or baseball is taking plot points, actions, and weaving a beautiful narrative that elicits their emotion. And so I feel that is why why the Philippians quote I said a second ago really bears some fruit. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also the interests of others. 1 John says, whoever says he abides in him, Jesus, ought to walk in the same way in which he walked. If you abide in Jesus, you should walk the walk of Jesus. And what was the walk of Jesus? The walk of Jesus was love and compassion and taking the time to speak to the children and to the widowed and to the sick and to the homeless and to the imprisoned and to all those people. He took the time to talk to the outcast and the marginalized, as well as those in power, as well as just your random common people who were just, walking around every day. Jesus walked in love and spoke in love and acted in love. And if that meant taking the time to get to know someone and their interests and to make something from that experience, to form that relationship, then, excellent. And if you are doing the same thing, good on you. So let us just take a minute to say we shouldn't covet our neighbor's things. However, we shouldn't run away from, say, the unwanted advances of someone who wants to share their fandom with you. I may not want to hear about, a particular interest because that's not something that really speaks to me. But I should honor that person by letting them get their 2 cents in and seeing what it is that that particular hobby or interest speaks to them, and how that brings out who they are, because that's how we get to know people, is to uh, not just know what they are interested in, but what that really does is it doesn't really tell me about soccer or baseball. What it really tells me is who that person is and how I can connect to them on a relationship level. So let's go out there, everyone, and remember, if you're stuck in a boring conversation with somebody who wants to tell you all about their stamp collection, give them a few minutes. It's the kind thing to do. It's the neighborly thing to do. And I would say, based on these snippets of scripture that I've selected, it's the Christian thing to do. So good on you for watching the Europa League. If you're watching the College World Series, have fun with that. If you're watching some summer baseball or whatever it is that you're getting after, go for it. I myself will be getting ready for some upcoming comic book movies. Currently, I'm watching Loki on Disney Plus. By the way, another thing, like, I could go on and on and on about all the little Easter eggs and notes that are in Loki, but I imagine that wouldn't really speak to people who haven't been following all of these Marvel movies since the beginning. But hopefully, if I'm doing it either here in a place like this, or in a sermon at church, or just at coffee hour, that give me a minute, give me some slack, see the joy that it brings out in me, or the frustration, and let that be a vehicle to connect to others. I hope this has spoken to you. It's given me a great bit of joy to talk about, and so I will see you next Wednesday online, and I will hopefully see you at church on Sunday. Dear ones, I love you, and as always, God bless.